Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. In this video, I'm going to be going over the highlights and things you should pay attention to in this year's 2025 Turner Classic Movies or TCM Classic Film Festival. This happens usually around the end of April each year and is really the best source we have to see what new restorations are in the pipeline and what will eventually turn up on physical media over the next calendar year or two, because most studios will now premiere their restoration efforts or show rare prints or things they're working on. They will get their premiere or their first US screening here at the TCM Film Festival. So it's become more and more of a sort of means of premiering new restoration efforts. And this also goes for various studios and restoration houses in Europe. They will have their premieres here at the TCM Film Festival or have the first US screening. And when you go through the schedule, once it's posted, usually close to the event, as it's finally been updated with the screening formats and also which are new restorations, this is where you can usually see what will be coming through the pipeline over the next year or two in terms of what we can see on physical media and various restoration updates to classic catalog films. But also, it's important to look at their film print screenings because they get all kinds of rarities and treasures directly from the studios. And this also gives you an idea of what your art house or local theater that can project film may be able to eventually get if you're not able to go to the festival. But this year, as is usual, has a number of really notable films and film formats being screened that are really exclusive to the festival. So it's another year where I wish I had the spare money to take off of work, fly across the country, and book hotel lodgings for 3 days just to see some incredibly rare prints. So looking at the schedule is great for a classic film fan or a physical media collector to figure out what may be coming out in the next year or two, or what your art house theater might be able to book eventually. But it's also heartbreaking to think about what you could be seeing if you were able to attend the festival, and the tickets themselves in terms of the passes and laminates, they do start getting on up there in the dollar range, and then you have to factor in the cost of flying to LA and how expensive it is to stay in LA for 3 days and then trying to get into all the various screenings. And like any film festival, it's hard to get into every film you want to go to, and you have to look at the actual schedule breakdown of the various days and try to judge what you want to see most, and then also look at the various programs and other special events they have every year. So it's a great thing if you can actually go and afford to go, but unfortunately it's out of the realm of possibility for most of us. Each year typically has a theme, and this year is actually surrounding the anniversary of the British Film Institute. I believe they're celebrating their 90th anniversary this year, and so they have actually come to the TCM Film Festival and brought a number of their rare treasures from their film print library, and also dug into their vaults to not only bring newer prints that are made as part of their program of striking new film prints of classic titles, and that's something they've been doing for decades by this point. So they've got a number of those, which I'll highlight, but they've also brought some of their rare treasures that they've exhibited in their Film on Film Festival, which I've done videos about before, including two of the highlights from the last Film on Film Festival that I was just wishing I could afford to travel to London to go to that. So if you were like me and you wished you had been able to go to that, some of those rare treasures have been brought over to the US. So for 2025, in addition to the new restorations, there is a great focus on highlighting the British Film Institute, and they have literally flown over some of their rarest print treasures. So to dive into the overall schedule and highlight what I think are the important screenings, as usual, I've broken this up into categories. So we'll start with the new restorations and restoration premieres and just go through alphabetically. So these are all brand new restorations or new-ish restorations that are getting their premiere here, either their world premiere or their US premiere, and all of these should be arriving on physical media disc releases sometime in the near future. The first is the classic Marx Brothers film Animal Crackers, which has been restored in 4K by Universal, so it's a 4K DCP of a new 4K restoration. They have done the Marx Brothers films they own several different times over the different eras, but we have not seen a big UHD update, and so this indicates that could potentially be in the cards as an upgrade to their last go-round on the Blu-ray box set. So it would follow in a sort of similar pattern as Universal finally did with the classic horror films for the main core titles. So Animal Crackers now having a 4K DCP from a 4K restoration does indicate we might see perhaps a Universal Marx Brothers UHD box set at some point. Next, there's a listing for Back to the Future, which is credited as having a brand new IMAX restoration. This is similar to how 7 was premiered at the TCM Festival last year, with the new restoration having the IMAX designation. Now, it's unknown if this is just the same 4K restoration and master that was put out on UHD that was director supervised, now being sort of retrofitted and reformatted for the IMAX format, or if they've done entirely new work on top of that 4K master. It's just not really known what this refers to, but there seems to have been some new work done to show a 4K presentation of Back to the Future in the IMAX format in terms of digital IMAX theaters. So I know the 4K master of Back to the Future does have some issues and quirks, so I don't know if they've done new work to maybe address some of those, or again, if they just sort of retrofitted the 4K master into the IMAX form. In a really exciting bit of news, there is a new restoration premiere of the 1926 silent version of Beau Geste, and this has a brand new score from the Monte Alto Motion Picture Orchestra. So this is going to be the world premiere of the restoration of the silent version of this classic adventure film. And so hopefully we'll be able to see a lovely Blu-ray of this restoration. So then at home you can see a beautiful version of the silent version of Beau Geste, and then compare it to the wonderful classic sound remake. The big news is, of course, the listing for the iconic 1959 remake of Ben-Hur, the William Wyler version, being credited as a brand new world premiere restoration. There's no other information besides that, but Warner has said that it's one of the, of course, the big titles they've been trying to sort of work on, but it's such a big, massive film in MGM's Camera 65, so Ultra Panavision. So there's so much work that has to go into it, but this seems to indicate we might finally be seeing the new full-scale restoration overhaul of Ben-Hur, as we've seen Warner finally do on North by Northwest, which was also in that sort of group of titles that were major catalog crown jewels that required a lot of work and were large format. They've also done The Searchers, but given that the Warner restorations of both The Searchers and North by Northwest had some major issues, I don't know how this is going to turn out on the eventual UHD release, but one can only presume that a listing for a new world premiere restoration of Ben-Hur can only mean the new complete overhaul, brand new restoration, high resolution scan of Ben-Hur that we've been led to believe Warner has been sort of working on over the years. And thus, if it gets a premiere here, as the others did, we could see a UHD release within the year, but probably before the year is out. I'm sure we'll have a UHD release. Next is the iconic noir The Big Combo, which is credited as a brand new restoration, this with Ignite Films and UCLA handling the restoration efforts. So I believe this will obviously see a Blu-ray and possibly UHD then from Ignite Films, following in the wake of their other restorations, such as the iconic Invaders from Mars. And The Big Combo, as one of the most analyzed of all noir films, has never had a truly stupendous transfer or restoration. It's had, good editions and solid Blu-rays of older masters, but it has really needed the complete restoration overhaul from a modern high-res scan, particularly for its incredible photography, which is probably its most most discussed aspects. So, as one of the most visually analyzed noirs of all of film noir, it has really needed this level of restoration. So, I'm really excited to see that once it finally hits disc. Next is the classic wartime romance drama, The Enchanted Cottage from 1945. This is listed as a brand new premiere restoration as a DCP, and since it's a Warner-held title, one can only assume this will be another modern high-resolution Warner MPI scan for release on a Warner Archive Blu-ray, unless somebody like Criterion will license it for a boutique label release, but I'm sure this will probably be turning up as a new Warner Archive Blu-ray this year. In a real surprise, there is a 4K restoration premiere of the classic documentary George Stevens, A Filmmaker's Journey, that was made by George Stevens Jr., the great director's son, who has been one of the great pioneering film historians, particularly in the areas of promoting his father's career and legacy, but also in being an incredible interviewer and gathering so many interviews with various legends from the golden age of Hollywood, and of course has published these many times, and including in some really indispensable tomes and great books that belong in every classic film lover's book collection. But the documentary was made, I believe, back in the 80s, and has seen releases on various Warner titles, both as a standalone DVD and sometimes versions are included as supplements. But here it's been completely, I believe, basically rebuilt in 4K resolution, obviously going back and rescanning the original interviews, and then probably going in and rescanning the film elements and also incorporating new restoration masters for all the various clips of the films. So basically this will no longer be locked to older standard definition presentations, as again I have it on the standalone DVD, and that's obviously an old master anyway, so it's really fantastic to see one of the classic film documentaries actually getting not only a full upgrade, but an upgrade to 4K resolution and a complete restoration itself. So this was a real surprise to see here. Next is a Sony restoration of the 1958 Western Gunman's Walk, which was directed by Phil Carlson and shot by Charles Lawton Jr., two really great names among genre films who would be no stranger to classic film fans. This is one of the Westerns I've always had on my watch list, and now there is a lovely new Sony restoration, which presumably could turn up either on a lovely Indicator Blu-ray, as they have a great licensing deal with Sony, or we might see it from Criterion or another boutique label, and if not one of those, perhaps Sony might decide to release it themselves, as they are doing more and more Blu-ray and UHD releases. But anytime we can see a lovely new Sony restoration of a classic Western, it is reason to celebrate, as their 4K restoration upgrades of the iconic Renown cycle are some of the greatest film restorations I've ever seen. Then we have a brand new restoration of the classic HUD, which is credited as being both from Paramount and Janus Films. Since Janus is mentioned here, I'm thinking it's quite possible we could see this classic modern Western directed by Martin Ritt finally not only have a lovely new restoration, but possibly and likely see a Criterion release on Blu-ray and UHD. The only hiccup is, of course, Paramount's involved, and their mastering practices are not really the greatest, as anyone who gets into the nitty-gritty of physical media releases will know. But hopefully with Janus being involved and this potentially being a Criterion release, the results will turn out pretty well. But this is a real classic catalog title that, due to its incredible black and white photography by James Wong Howe, would really benefit from a modern restoration, and the older masters, while still technically okay and solid, leave much room for improvement. So this could be an absolutely stunning UHD, say, as a Criterion release. Another real surprise is a new Warner restoration of the Gershwin biopic, Rhapsody in Blue. And what's interesting about this is this new restoration restores about 30 or more minutes of cut material that was never seen by the general public. The film was heavily cut down in terms of the musical numbers, and apparently this long, complete version was only shown in a pre-release version to servicemen in World War II, much like what happened with the pre-release version of The Big Sleep, or what is known as the 1945 version. Warner did this several times, and other studios would as well, but these few examples of Warner titles are the most famous, with The Big Sleep being the one most people know of. But getting a new restoration of admittedly a deeper catalog film that's going to have more of a limited interest in it, since it's a musical biopic that's, of course, heavily fictionalized, as most biopics would be at that time, but having over 30 minutes of musical scenes and song numbers restored to it is really something to commend Warner for doing, because not only is it something they should do in terms of restoring films, but it's taking a chance on a film that obviously doesn't have the biggest fan base to begin with, and also putting back a substantial amount of footage, and thus having more of a restoration workload because it's a substantial amount of footage. So obviously this will likely be seeing a Warner Archive Blu-ray release in the near future in terms of this year, and we'll be able to see this new extended restoration for ourselves. Warner is also premiering a new restoration of the classic Kazan-directed Splendor in the Grass, which should really be a knockout on a new transfer on Blu-ray and or UHD, depending on, well, obviously I think they would have probably completed it at 4K in this day and age, but that means we could see a Warner Archive Blu-ray release, or perhaps a Criterion disc or another boutique label picking this up. But this is another classic title in the Warner library that definitely needed a new scan and should be a real knockout. Then we have the US premiere of the Sony restoration of the classic The Talk of the Town, which has seen a 4K UHD release by the standard Sony label. So this is merely its first US public theatrical screening, and that is one of the classic titles I had been hoping Sony would revisit, as the DVD was definitely not all that it should be and was definitely getting on up there in years. And personally, I think it's one of George Stevens' most underrated films, and one of the most underrated in the screwball comedy vein, particularly of Cary Grant vehicles. And then we close out with the new Universal 4K restoration of The Wiz, directed by Sidney Lumet, which is seeing a new disc release from Criterion. That's already, already been announced, but here it's getting its big theatrical premiere with the new Dolby Atmos remix of the film. Now we go to the next category, which is unfortunately the negative flip side to the new restorations category. And this is the category of titles and screenings that are being shown that have either compromised masters, but primarily revisionist changes and choices made that are unfortunately baked into what gets shown. The festival is actually opening with a screening of The Empire Strikes Back with George Lucas in attendance. So obviously this means it's going to be a DCP of the 4th special edition of The Empire Strikes Back, because the Star Wars trilogy has technically had 4 revisionist special editions piling on top of one another, with more and more destructive work that moves the films further away from their original picture and sound as they were finished. So ideally, the TCM Festival would be showing an original print or a proper restored version of the 1980 release version, whether it was the standard 35mm general release version or the slightly different 70mm blow-up version, and then obviously with one of the original audio tracks. But with that not being in existence for theatrical screening, and only the 4th special edition DCP being made available, and with Lucas himself being in attendance, there's no way in hell that's going to happen. So unfortunately, the opening film of the TCM Classic Film Festival is the heavily altered 4th special edition of The Empire Strikes Back, which actually has some of, I think, the worst changes ever made to the Star Wars trilogy in terms of editing and pacing, particularly in the film's final act. So that's unfortunate. It's one of those examples where I think if they're only going to let you screen the 4th special edition, you just shouldn't even bother at that point. Just just choose something else that's deserving, because the original versions of the Star Wars trilogy need to be publicly available, and people need to be more vocal about that in official circles. Then we have a screening of the Michael Mann film Heat from 1995 for its 30th anniversary, with Mann in attendance doing a Q&A session. Mann is, of course, infamous for making changes to his films time and time again on new physical media releases and home video masters. Heat has had a variety of tweaks and changes over the years. First, the removal of some dialogue from the theatrical version and the altering of the original sound design to be less aggressive, so only the original video master properly preserves the theatrical presentation in terms of VHS, Laserdisc, and the very first DVD. Then, of course, the color timing has been redone multiple times and modernized across different masters in different ways. The sound has been remixed and tweaked even further, and it's like every Michael Mann film, it typically can't escape some degree of tweaking. So obviously this is going to be a DCP of the latest 4K version, and so technically it's not a proper presentation of how the film would have been shown originally on the original release 30 years ago. Preferably one would get an original release print from 1995 that's been properly preserved from the rights holders, probably from the Warner Vault, I would assume, even though the rights have sort of changed hands over the years, and be showing a 1995 preserved release print with the original extraordinarily aggressive 5.1 mix, but sadly that is not the case. So obviously, this would basically just be a DCP of what you get on the UHD release. Next is the Warner DCP of their new 4K master of Superman the movie. And unfortunately, that master has a number of technical problems as seen on the UHD release. And then Warner quietly made a slightly tweaked, corrected version, which was never released to the public. So it's probably going to be that basically a version 1.2 or 2.0. So you should technically get a slightly better picture presentation in theatrical screenings than you do on the UHD release. However, one doesn't know what audio mix it might carry. It's probably one of the remixes of the film, which are totally inferior to the original 70mm mix, which has only been released on Laserdisc and then on the first pressing of the UHD, which is now quite difficult to find. So ideally, they would be showing the slightly tweaked, corrected 4K Warner master of Superman the movie in its theatrical cut with the original and frankly groundbreaking 70mm mix, but I doubt that's going to happen. So this particular screening, it's really unknown which version of their 4K master they'll be using and which audio track it will have. And if that wasn't disheartening enough, it is going to be preceded by the iconic Fleischer cartoon, The Arctic Giant, from their legendary run of Superman short cartoons. But this being a Warner presentation, this will be a DCP of their absolutely horrendous restoration, and I have to use air quotes because it's anything but a restoration. So this will be the Warner Master with iffy color timing, extraordinarily high levels of grain management and grain removal, various errors in color, and of course also having the errors in the soundtrack because they recreated and added new errors to the errors that were already baked into their previous master and then hit it with even more noise reduction. So unfortunately, this is a Warner master of their horrible version of the Fleischer cartoons and not one of the painstaking restored versions being done by the Fleischer Group, who were actually at the TCM Festival last year. One would hope that the festival would just be running a DCP made by the Fleischer Group, but this being a Warner presentation of their 4K master of the 1978 film, it's obviously going to be exactly what you get on the horrible Blu-ray, which is so bad it should have never been released, and Warner should be ashamed of the work that they did. The Fleischer Group is having to actually go and do the same work on their own without having access to the negatives to address all of the problems Warner caused due to their frankly, negligence. Then we have a listing for a screening of Thunderball, obviously for the film's 60th anniversary, being 1965 to 2025. But it is unknown what this DCP will be. We do have the 4K UHD release of the Connery Bond films sort of looming in the next couple months from Warner, but typically when the films get shown, it's still the older HD masters dating back to the original Lowry masters started in 2004. So typically when you see a DCP of one of the Bond films, particularly the older films, it's essentially what you see on the Blu-ray in terms of what the actual master is. But it's unknown if this will be the older pre-existing HD master in a 2K DCP or if it's going to be the new 4K master that has not yet seen a UHD release and should be better than the frankly crummy 2K master that's out on Blu-ray. So I hope it's the new 4K master, but it's not said, and since they are typically indicating what's a 4K DCP and what's not, I'm afraid it's probably just going to be the old 2K master, and who knows what audio track it will have, but it will very likely be a version of the MGM remix audio that dates back to their 1995 Laserdisc box set. So unfortunately, while one would hope the 60th anniversary screening could be a full, complete archival 4K restoration with either of the two original mono mixes from the original release, that's sadly not going to happen. So if you go to this screening, you're very likely going to see either the 2K DCP of what's on the Blu-ray with the MGM remix, or possibly the newer 4K DCP of the as yet unreleased 4K master we're going to see on the UHD, again, likely with some remix. And then lastly, we have the Paramount DCP of Hitchcock's iconic To Catch a Thief. This likely would be a DCP of their recent 4K master, which was a revisit to their horrendously grain-managed and terrible 2020 master that turned up on Blu-ray. Unfortunately, Paramount didn't really leave the film alone, and it has a variety of visual issues that will likely be magnified on the DCP release, and it will very likely only carry a multi-channel remix of the film, as their 4K UHD only had a remix of the stereo remix and did not have any form of the original mono track. So when you're going to this, it is very likely going to be essentially a theatrical DCP presentation of the compromise presentation you're getting on the UHD. For the next category, I'm just going to call it a needs a better release or could really do with a restoration. So there's a few titles being shown as DCP that are outdated or older masters or masters with some issues. So I did want to highlight these. There is a DCP screening of the classic Powell and Loy vehicle, I Love You Again from 1940. This is found on physical media in the TCM Powell and Loy box set and was directed by W.S. Van Dyke, who of course directed them in Manhattan Melodrama and iconically in The Thin Man. This obviously is coming from that same master generated for the DVD, and I don't know of there being a new scan of this film or the other Powell and Loy films that haven't seen Warner Archive Blu-rays, and it's not listed as a new restoration, so I can only assume this is just going to be a DCP of what was generated for the DVD. The Universal DCP of The Incredible Shrinking Man is being screened, and I believe this would be from Universal's newer restoration that was released by Criterion on Blu-ray. Unfortunately, that is just an unbelievably compromised master due to seemingly extreme levels of grain management. While it is technically better than the old master Universal had from years ago that had all kinds of over-sharpening and such, the new master is so soft and at times smeary looking. It has all the telltale signs of being extraordinarily grain managed, and this is a film that should be extraordinarily grainy due to all of the opticals and trick photography involved and having, multiple passes and dupes and things used. So I would hope it gets a proper hands-off archival restoration at some point, and it unfortunately hasn't yet, and this will probably look even worse with it all being magnified, blown up on the big screen. A DCP of the iconic 1940s sound remake of The Mark of Zorro is being shown, and this will presumably be a DCP of the HD master that was used for the Kino Lorber Blu-ray, but this is one of the iconic Fox titles that could really use a brand new 4K restoration, modern scan, and frankly, a UHD release, because it is the 1940 Mark of Zorro with Tyrone Power and Basil Rathbone, featuring arguably the greatest sword fight ever filmed in terms of pure sword fighting technique and the actual physicality of the sequence, and the two actors being well matched. It is still a solid master, but it's an older one, and I can only imagine what it would be like blown up to the theatrical screen. So it's one of the iconic Fox titles that I keep hoping gets announced as a new 4K restoration. And then lastly, the Paramount DCP of Sunset Boulevard is being run. Obviously, probably going to be a 2K version of what we have on the Blu-ray, which is solid, but that is an older master, and being one of Billy Wilder's most iconic films, one would wish that it could get the red carpet royal treatment for a brand new 4K restoration and UHD release, but also that would mean going through Paramount, and no film needs to go through Paramount given their extraordinarily revisionist practices in handling films. So this would obviously just be a DCP of what is on the Blu-ray at present. Now to move on to 35mm film print screenings, there are 19 to discuss, with a good number of them being from the British Film Institute, either as part of their program to create new film prints of iconic titles and classic films so that future generations will be able to see classic films on film, but also some of their really notable treasures direct from their vault that have again been shipped over to Los Angeles. So in terms of the 19, which I'll just briefly go through alphabetically, there is All This in Heaven 2, and then a BFI print made in 2008 of the classic Blithe Spirit. Then we've got the Minnelli film Brigadoon with Gene Kelly, followed by a print screening of the Astaire Rogers classic Carefree. Then the 1935 Diamond Gem starring Edward Arnold. The 1930 classic Norma Shearer starring The Divorcee has a 35mm print coming from UCLA and Warner. The Martin Ritt directed Edge of the City has a print screening from the BFI collection. So this is a print from the BFI vault that's been shipped over for special screening. The wartime classic A Guy Named Joe has a print screening, which should be really wonderful to see this classic on the big screen from a print. And obviously this is a film that could really use a modern restoration. The real highlight of this group is, of course, the BFI bringing their print of Jaws over to the festival. This was shown in their last Film on Film festival, and the really special aspect is that this is an original 1975 dye transfer IB Technicolor print made at the British Technicolor Lab, which typically had a more subtle and nuanced approach to how they timed film prints versus what you see on American dye transfer prints. So this being a perfectly preserved, original, non-fading dye transfer Technicolor print, a UK one at that, of Jaws, means you're seeing the best possible iteration of the original release version with the original mono mix, and absolutely no digital tweaks or tomfoolery whatsoever. So this is essentially every Jaws fan's dream. This is the best possible presentation of the film, the best surviving version of an original dye transfer print, and a British one, which should be a bit more nuanced in its color than an American print if a good dye transfer print was properly preserved and saved. But it's one of the BFI's treasures, as it is such a rare commodity, as very few seem to have survived. And this has been properly preserved since 1975, and it gets very rarely screened. So it's amazing that the BFI also shipped this over to Los Angeles. So this is a rare treat, and it is the best possible way to experience Jaws, as it's an original British 1975 IB Technicolor print. Next is a print screening of the 1953 musical Lily, and then a really nice treat, a print screening of the 1932 Preco classic Me and My Gal. Then there's a print screening of Moonlight and Pretzels, which is actually a musical directed by the great Carl Freund, so it's among the few handful of films that he actually directed. In between his legendary career as one of the great cinematographers of all time. They've got a print screening of the 1930 classic Morocco with Dietrich and Cooper, which should be amazing to see on a print. Warner has loaned a print of the classic Mrs. Miniver, which of course has a solid Blu-ray, but it should be fantastic to see on a print. A film I've always wanted to see is having a print screening, which is the 1936 The Preview Murder Mystery, which is essentially a sort of blend of wisecracking screwball comedy and essentially trying to solve a murder mystery. The BFI is bringing another of their newly struck prints, this made in 2024, of the 1933 classic The Private Life of Henry VIII, which this print the BFI struck was made in 2024, and this is its premiere. A really rare film to see, as it has no physical media release, is 1934's Servant's Entrance, and the most notable aspect about this film is that it had a Walt Disney-made animated nightmare sequence, and for some strange reason, that aspect has never seemingly convinced anyone that this film should get any scan and home video release. It has seemingly never been released on any home video format and never had an official release. It may be something to do with rights, perhaps, but one would think that a 1930s film with a Walt Disney animated sequence, one would think that, people would be interested in that, and studios would maybe want to do a physical media release. So this is one of the most important print screenings to see in terms of this year's festival, because there's no other way to really see this film, and this will be its best possible quality, as outside of this, you just see little clips or images of the animated sequence and really terrible quality pop up online and then disappear. The classic George Powell 1960 version of The Time Machine is being shown on a print loaned by Warner. And then last, for the standard 35mm screenings, a BFI print struck in 2021 of the Lubitsch masterpiece To Be or Not to Be from 1942. That should be a really wonderful experience, not only to see a Lubitsch masterpiece on the big screen from a print, but also to see one of the beautiful newly struck BFI preservation print copies. Now we move on to the final three categories, which are all special format screenings, and these are going to be the biggest of all draws, because these are all things you're not going to get to see anywhere else for the most part. The first is the 35mm nitrate screenings, which are both 1940s classics starring Joan Crawford. The first is a print from Disney and the Library of Congress, a nitrate print of the classic Daisy Kenyon, directed by Otto Preminger, with really wonderful noir photography that should be stunning seen in nitrate. So don't miss this, as any opportunity to see nitrate being screened is incredibly rare, as there's only a handful of theaters in the world that are equipped and approved to show nitrate, but studios and archives are very rarely willing to loan out nitrate prints because there's so much that surrounds it in terms of proper techniques, and even just transporting it is a particular affair that takes a lot of doing. So that is the first. And then the second is the BFI's vault copy print, their nitrate copy of the classic masterpiece Mildred Pierce, which was another highlight of their last Film on Film Festival. And seeing this film, one of the iconic 40s films, and with such beautiful photography in black and white, being seen as it was intended on nitrate with that incredible silver content, and thus being able to see the incredible balance of deep blacks and whites, but also the incredible nuance in the grayscale with the original silver content there that you would have on the negative and the nitrate release print. This makes it a real treasure, and the way you can ultimately best experience any classic 40s film. But to see Mildred Pierce on nitrate from the BFI's beautifully preserved copy should be an incredible experience. And if you didn't make it to their festival in London last year, you now have the opportunity, the incredibly rare opportunity, to see the classic Mildred Pierce on nitrate as it was meant to be seen. For 70mm large format prints, we have two screenings. The first is a screening of a 70mm print of 2001: A Space Odyssey. This is presumably actually one of the newer Warner restoration prints. And of course, after their last restoration, they did generate some new prints. And hopefully, this would have their restored version of the original 1968 6-track magnetic stereo, which was finally restored to the film and also available on the UHD release as an audio option. But you do have the opportunity to see 2001 in its best possible form, which of course is 70mm. The other screening is really special as it is the rarely screened theatrical 70mm blow-up print of the masterpiece Apocalypse Now, with the groundbreaking original 6-track magnetic stereo mix in Dolby for Dolby 70mm screening. The mix supervised by guru sound genius, mixing sound designer Walter Murch, and without question, the sound of Apocalypse Now, the original 70mm 6-track mix for the theatrical run, only heard on 70mm blow-up prints, is one of the most important groundbreaking sound mixes of all time. It's still one of the most important soundtracks that has ever existed in terms of film sound. It's the soundtrack that really changed the game for everyone. But the only way to properly experience it is an original 70mm print, which of course are very few and far between now. And this one is from the Eastman Museum, but it's actually part of Martin Scorsese's personal collection. So this was obviously the print that he somehow obtained and had it in his own collection, and it's housed at the George Eastman Museum vault, and it has been screened once or twice in the past couple of years. So this is another incredibly rare don't miss opportunity to see Apocalypse Now the way it was originally released and meant to be experienced, because no version of the film's audio has fully replicated that original 70mm 6-track experience. Some home versions get pretty close, and supposedly the original 6-track master has been junked or was lost many decades ago. So this is your best chance to see and experience and hear the film as it totally blew audiences away in 1979 on a perfectly preserved original 70mm print. And then the final category is the ultimate major surprise and probably once in a lifetime opportunity of the TCM Film Festival, and that's the VistaVision category. VistaVision is seeing a bit of a comeback, seeing as multiple new productions are playing around with the iconic high-resolution format developed by Paramount during the widescreen revolution of the 1950s. VistaVision is a wonderful format due to how it can really suit different production needs, right down to even having a variable aspect ratio depending on what you want and what theaters can screen. But it's very rare, in fact, insanely rare, to actually see VistaVision films in their original form, which is, of course, an 8-perf horizontal frame. That was basically the full Premiere Deluxe version of VistaVision that was never really utilized outside of the early days of the format. So when you read about VistaVision, it was an 8-perf horizontal format that basically took what would typically be running through the camera vertically and turning the film on its side to expose a larger and thus more detailed and higher resolution frame. Well, in its greatest original form, it could actually be shown on a custom projector from a custom 8-perf horizontal film print, but that was a very expensive commodity, and thus theaters didn't really want to pay to do that, and neither did Paramount. Plus, VistaVision in its best premiere form would also have the wonderful Perspectus stereo utilized instead of an optical mono track or a magnetic track. So what this meant is that of all the VistaVision films, only perhaps White Christmas, the first one, and some of the earliest films had premiere runs in their fullest quality 8-perf VistaVision form, with the 8-perf prints being generated for the special theaters that had the special projectors. But even that, there's not much information about it, so I've always wondered, ever since becoming a geek about film formats, were any other VistaVision films ever shown in the full 8-perf VistaVision print, or were any made? So Paramount dug around and apparently discovered they had full 8-perf VistaVision print materials of some VistaVision titles, and so we're actually getting two screened, the classic John Sturges Gunfight at the OK Corral and the classic We're No Angels. Both of these are being screened as 8 perf VistaVision prints, so you can get the full experience of VistaVision in its original form. And these were never shown to the public, as far as I'm understanding it from the bits of information we've gotten. They also have had to construct brand new VistaVision projectors and done a full custom install in the Chinese theater to actually show these. And these prints themselves weren't even designed for public exhibition, as they don't carry a soundtrack. So the sound is having to be run separately and synced to the print as it's running. So this is the product of a lot of different entities putting their heads together and the festival agreeing to do this, to do a custom install build of new VistaVision equipment, which will also stay in place for some of these newer films that are using the formats to shoot on. So obviously this might be something you might be able to return to the Chinese theater and see some of these newer titles on the new equipment that's been made. But these two films were never shown in the full 8 per VistaVision form, only as standard 35mm reductions, as all other VistaVision films were. But these two are being shown to the public for the first time in their fullest complete form, and should be absolute showstoppers. And they are once in a lifetime opportunities, unless probably maybe at next year's festival they might show one or two of these again, or some of the other VistaVision titles they have these original 8 perf materials for. But again, these are prints that were made and not designed for public showing because they don't have a soundtrack. So this is a once in a lifetime thing, and this is something I never thought we'd see, and something I always wondered about. Were there any other 8 perf prints made for VistaVision films? Were any ever shown? Did they make some and just put them on the shelf and they're sitting in a vault somewhere? Well, apparently there were for at least 2 of them, and with everybody getting their heads together, we have the opportunity to actually see these. So the absolute highlights of this festival, the once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. Yes, there are some. Yes, there's some for nitrate, but the real headliners and the I can't believe this is happening are the 8 perf prints in full VistaVision for Gunfight at the OK Corral and We're No Angels, which is something I truly never expected to see in my lifetime. 8 perf VistaVision prints being run. So those are my thoughts and what I think are the highlights of the 2025 TCM Classic Film Festival that's taking place later this month in April of 2025. Again, there are some really incredible film print treasures being run, 2 incredible opportunities to see classics on nitrate, 2 opportunities to see classics on 70mm, but especially the mind-blowing opportunity, and I think once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, to see 2 VistaVision films in the full 8 perf VistaVision that were never released in that form. So that right there is the gigantic draw, and then you can supplement that with everything else, the incredible treasures being brought over from the British Film Institute and their participation this year, and then topped off by the new restoration premieres as DCPs and 4K DCPs, with the hope and expectation that those will likely be seeing physical media releases over the next year to 2 years. As usual, I like looking at film festival lineups even if I can't go, because it sort of lets me know what's in the pipeline and what might be coming out on disc, but also it lets you know what is in existence and is being screened in terms of film prints, so you know what your local theater or art house theater might be able to book and screen, since Warner or Universal or other studios are actually loaning some prints out for the festival. It gives you an idea of what's essentially out there that is able to be rented. So it's cool to look at the TCM Festival to see what restorations are premiering, but it's also cool to look and see what film prints are around that can actually be rented and screened. So the hope is that, your local theater might be able to book some of these. Honestly, since I do this every year, I would like that concept to actually maybe get formally recognized at some point. Basically in the way that Oscar-nominated films, especially the shorts, get grouped together as a package and sort of shown at art houses across the country. And how TCM has been used as a brand for like Fathom event screenings and such, which unfortunately, due to how bad Fathom Events is. Usually are not great in their technical quality and presentation. But I would hope at some point that the TCM Classic Film Festival lineup could be used as a means of getting some of these restorations and rare prints out to art house theaters that are basically participating theaters and make it a whole program. Usually we see some of these restoration DCPs make it to some of the other art houses, but it would be really cool if it could be a sort of industry dedicated effort to make it something that all theaters can sort of get their hands on. So everybody across the country and even in other countries gets more of an opportunity to see these on the big screen instead of having to wait for maybe some of them to pop up so they get an opportunity to see a restoration DCP, for example. But in any case, I'm just really happy to see so many notable titles on both film, rare prints, and new restoration DCPs hitting the festival this year. It's a really fantastic lineup. There are, of course, other films being shown, but I try to focus and highlight what I think are the most important things, and especially the once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, with the big one being the two 8-perf VistaVision prints that were never shown to the general public and not designed for public exhibition, actually being screened with brand new custom VistaVision projectors being designed and built and installed. That's the major highlight, along with the other incredible highlights, but that's the showstopper. I can't believe this is happening moment. So as usual, I wish I had the money to spare to drop everything and fly across the country and book hotel tickets and somehow get a pricey laminate pass and try to get into these screenings. But if you're in the LA area or you're going to the TCM festival, I hope this video has been helpful in sort of sifting through the schedule and looking at what maybe you can hopefully get into, as I'm sure the VistaVision screenings and some of the other notable screenings I discussed are going to be very difficult to get into. But also, I hope this has been fun and informative for fellow film fans and physical media nerds like myself who are not able to go to the festival but like to look into these things to sort of figure out what's out there, what's been restored, what film prints are out there, and hopefully what maybe will turn up on physical media or turn up at your local art house theater in the near future. So as always, I hope my babbles about classic films and physical media has been at least somewhat fun and informative, and definitely keep supporting incredible film festivals like the TCM Film Festival when you can, as it is the best way to see classic films and also keep alive the proper theatrical exhibition of film prints and rare formats. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.